Thank you. Well, great turnout because it's a really engaging, compelling subject. 2024 is really going to be the year of agency and Chinese EVs entering the UK market, and really challenging not only the manufacturing base, but also how dealerships attack that subject. Okay, so we've got 3 experts ready to talk on Chinese EVs. We have Tony Whitehorn. Now, Tony Whitehorn, as many people will know, spent 30 years at senior levels in the UK manufacturing industry, and probably most interestingly, saw the Kia brand develop in the 80s.
Hyundai, actually, but...
Hyundai, sorry. Hyundai
saw the Kia
brand.
one as well.
Hyundai brand develop in the UK, so he knows how to build a brand in the UK. Okay, secondly, we have Mike Dean. Now, Mike is Global Head of Automotive Research at Bloomberg Intelligence, and tells me he's just returned from China and has some particular insights into the domestic market in China. Because although we think about it in terms of our own market, there's some very, very interesting dynamics going on in the Chinese market, which we will probably see as well into our own. Okay, lastly, we have Owen Edwards, and he's head of downstream automotive at Grant Thornton. And I've heard Owen speak many times. I think his specialist subject is battery technology as well as...
Maybe.
Maybe. Well, we could talk about the real issues about infrastructure, because that is really, especially for the UK, who seems to be slightly lagging behind infrastructural developments, to see how that really pans out. Okay, so let's really start with the sort of setting the framework. We all know they're coming, Chinese EVs. Okay, so I want each of you to actually put into perspective why Chinese EVs are targeting the UK / Europe. What is it? Where have they come from? How has the domestic market matured? And how are they going about entering the European markets? Tony, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, to be honest. I think it's a great opportunity for our marketplace. What's happened, and Mike will actually probably tell you a bit better than I will on this one, what's going on in the Chinese market? The Chinese market is softening. And therefore, the Chinese manufacturers, the EV manufacturers, fundamentally have got to look elsewhere, try and get their revenue. They're not going to go to America just yet, because the Americans aren't embracing the Chinese brands. So therefore, looking at Europe. The issue, a number of them have gone to Norway. I've been to Norway, I've been to see them out in Norway. That's almost like the greenhouse, the hothouse, where they're actually starting them. And then they're starting to go to the mainland. A number of them are now going into Germany and France and Italy. They want to come to the UK. The UK is an open market. It's a highly competitive market. The biggest challenge, however, it's right-hand drive. And unless you're someone like Chery, Omoda, who have actually got a right-hand drive heritage, it's very difficult for a number of those Chinese manufacturers to come to the UK. But that's a little bit of a background as to why they're looking now to go global. They've had the experience back in China. They see that Europe, and particularly the UK, as an opportunity, but right-hand drive is a bit of a barrier for them.
China, yes. So, I was there a few weeks ago, and it's an interesting market because, one, the economy hasn't recovered as strongly as they thought it would do post-COVID, and secondly, it's just intensely competitive. So you've got 91 different brands in China, very much focused on battery electric vehicles, and the price competition is intense. So there's not a lot of profit in China at the moment, so they're looking for alternative markets, more profitable markets. I wouldn't say UK is their main focus, or Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Australia, but it's certainly in their sights.
Yes, I suppose Australia's a right-hand market, so they've got to get up to scale on the right-hand market dynamic as well in manufacturing terms, haven't they, I guess? Yeah. Okay, Owen, what's your take?
Yeah, so my take on it is really, if you look at the European markets, we've got 15 million new vehicles every year. UK is the second largest, broadly about 2.3 million units. Why wouldn't you want to be part of that market is the first question. Second question is, our tariffs are only 10%. If, as Tony said, they don't want to go to America, why? Well, there's also a 25.6% tariff from Mr. Trump, who's not there anymore, but clearly he set that in, and that's causing them real issues about entering into the American market. So fundamentally, it is easier to come to the European market than it is to go to America. So why would you not hit, a 15 million market as America is? It's much better to do it that way.
Right, okay then. So you give it a framework about actually where they're coming from, the domestic market challenges for Chinese EVs themselves, and they're looking for opportunities outside the domestic market. We calculated at AM that there'll be 10 Chinese EV brands in the UK market by the end of the decade. Okay, which ones are the strongest contenders to really establish their brand reputation in the country?
Okay. It's quite interesting now. A number of you will know this already because you've probably got the franchise. You've got Aura and you've got BYD. They're the only two proper Chinese manufacturers. You've got MG and you've got Polestar, but I'm talking about the proper Chinese manufacturers, per se, who are there right now. You've got Omoda that are coming in March of next year. So they're the ones that have actually said, yes, we're here and ready to go. Thing with BYD, so BYD is profitable. They own the supply chain. They're the second largest battery manufacturer in the world. So from their perspective, they are a very profitable organization. Who do I think is going to be a winner moving forward? You've got three categories of Chinese manufacturers. You've got the state-owned manufacturers, so that's the Chery, that's the Chang'an, that's the Dongfeng, GAC, SAIC. So they're the state-owned manufacturers. Not all of them at this moment in time have said, we're coming. So GAC will come, and obviously Chery are coming in terms of Omoda. You've then got the private companies, so I call them private. That's the Geely, that's the Great Wall, that's the BYD. They are interesting. And you've got BYD and Great Wall who are there now. Geely are there in a different guise. And then you've got this other section, which I think is fascinating. And they're the people like XPeng, NIO, Li, Leap. They are the smaller manufacturers, but probably more agile. Which one is going to be a winner? It's a very difficult question to answer, to be honest. There's a lot of people who want to come here, but a lot of people who are going to lose a lot of money. Someone like NIO and XPeng are losing $1 billion a quarter at this moment in time. But they are all looking forward to what could happen. I think that the people who are there now, certainly BYD, have a great strength. I think Omoda are interesting. I see Matt's in the room here. So Omoda are interesting as well. They're Chery. So they are at the forefront of it. But keep your eyes open as to some of the more agile people who are coming a little bit later on.
Okay, Mike, what do you think? And what are the critical factors for success, actually? That's an entirely different chapter, isn't it?
I think it's going to be a lot more difficult than you think for Chinese brands to enter the UK market. You mentioned profitability, that's key. With the legacy brands, that they have their profitable ICE business to compensate for battery electric vehicles. For the new entrants, that doesn't happen. So you're right. So the BYD is one of the few companies that is profitable. So they have the ammunition to be able to make an entrance into the UK market. MG's been very successful. It's a recognized brand. Their sales aren't very good in China because it's associated with Shanghai Auto, who are their owners. So MG has the potential to grow further. But apart from BYD, I think it's going to be very difficult for other Chinese manufacturers to make an impact.
Just talking about scale at the end of the day. Scale?
Scale, yeah. I mean, scale is vitally important. So BYD has it. They overtook Volkswagen as the largest manufacturer in China this year, overtook Volkswagen. As I said, they're going to produce about 2 million units. So they have the scale. That's why they are profitable. And that's why it's going to be very difficult for the other companies to catch up.
Yes. Owen?
I mean, what can I add to what both of them have added? I mean, they're pretty much covered off the answers for me. But
develop that.
Yeah.
On if they've got scale, can they determine their own price?
Well, I think there's two things. One is there's the price, but also as well, it's what the dealer's looking to do. Okay, so at the end of the day, we can all flood into Chinese brands, and that's great. And we have to pick the right brand. And how do we pick the right brand? And it's really, as Mike has said, look at the profitability, look at the cash flow of the businesses, look at how many units they're manufacturing. So if they're only manufacturing, let's say, 5,000 units a quarter globally, is that really good? Is that really going to be a strong company down the line? You know, you're going to need, 125,000, 200,000 to make a a manufacturing process profitable. So there's going to be a lot of those that are going to be not so profitable. So look at the profitability, look at the cash flow, look at the cash burn. And you can do that by looking at their investor websites. Many of them are quoted already, such as the NEOs of this world. You've got to really understand, you've got to really do your due diligence to understand these. So is there any one that I would pick? BYD is clearly a positive there. Chery's been around for a long time. But fundamentally, you have to, for your dealership, get your finance guys out their office, kick the tyres and say, right, actually, what should we be looking at? Is this one right for us? Because don't forget, you're not going to have that aftermarket, nice aftermarket like you've got with the standard vehicles that you've got out there with the, the Fords, the BMWs, the Audis, etc. So you've got to cover that for a short period of time, 2 or 3 years. You've got to really consider what you're investing in and who your partner actually is.
Yeah.
They'll want to partner with a load of people, quite clearly, because they'll want to have a dealer network or an agency model or whatever the case may be. But fundamentally, you've got to be for the right fit for them, and they've got to be the right fit for you.
In those initial years, will they be looking at real volume then because of the after services lag?
Yeah, so depending on what you're doing. So if you're sitting there and you've got a limited amount of after sales, as most people in the room will know, that's 65 to 70% gross profit margin. That's great margin for any dealer to have, is the after sales. Grab it and hold on to it. But you don't get that when you have brand new vehicles. So when I put vehicles in Romania and Bulgaria and other areas around the world, that doesn't exist. So that's not the defensive bit of your business. You've got to really rely on the new car sales, but more importantly, you've got to rely on the used car sales. And it might not necessarily be the used car sales for that brand, BYD, because there's not enough new vehicles generating used vehicles. So therefore, you have to have something else to go with that, if that makes sense, to keep that security and the cash flow coming through from the business.
Right.
It's all about cash.
Okay, Tony, we've spoken, haven't we, about Chinese manufacturers wary of pricing too low. And could you perhaps explain, with your experience at Hyundai, exactly what their rationale is there?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting. Having worked for Toyota and Hyundai, I think Toyota, when they started to increase the volume, actually we had a good set of vehicles. We had Supra, Celica, MR2, and actually it was therefore easy to increase the volume. When we were at Hyundai, we had Amica, Getz. Those were the vehicles that we had to try and increase the brand and improve the brand from a very low spec and very cheap product was extremely difficult. A lot easier with Toyota. So therefore, people like BYD coming in with Atto 3, and interestingly, they got the Dolphin, which just come in, but they haven't launched their 2 low-priced Dolphins. They've gone in with a higher-priced Dolphins. And part of that is that if you launch with a lower-priced vehicle, it is very, very difficult to try and get the brand moving. So that's why you've got a number of these brands which aren't coming in very cheap, but are coming in mid-range, good value for money, but you watch, they will be able to come in cheaper.
Right. Okay, Mike, MG and the success of MG hit that sweet spot in terms of price, didn't it?
So, yeah, I think the average transaction price on the MG4, which is the second best-selling battery electric vehicle in the UK, is about £31,000. You compare that to what it sells in China, it's £14,000. So that's a massive difference. The way you can compete, I suppose, when you come into a new country is on branding. They don't have the brand. MG does, because it's known to this country. Can they compete on tech? BYD has good tech. XPeng has good tech. MG's tech's okay. So what else can you compete on? Well, it's price. And MG's competing on price.
Yes.
And that's why it's gaining market share.
Yes.
So that's going to be the difficult thing for other Chinese competitors, is how do they compete? Is it going to be on brand? Going to be very difficult. Tech, probably that's going to help. But price is going to be difficult. They start pricing incomparable to traditional automakers. They're going to find it very difficult.
Thank you. So they've got to take the sweet spot.
Yep.
But what, Owen, will be the effect if the European Commission decides to apply punitive tariffs on Chinese EV brands?
Well, that's going to be an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, it depends. It depends on where you're pricing the product. We've done some work, and UBS has done some work on prices of Chinese brands, and the belief is they could be up to 25% cheaper than a legacy brand. So that's your first question. is a 25% tariff going to hit the nail on the head? I would say, as Mike said already, there's tech in here, so there's value for money. So it's not just price, it's value for money and price we're looking at as well. And they are quality vehicles,
So
and I'm sure...
you think even though tariffs may be applied, it actually won't do enough to stop them coming?
If we want to apply tariffs, so the issue is if we want to apply tariffs like it did in America, then that slowed their economy, it slowed the Chinese economy down, and this tariff war. Do we want that? Question mark. That's open. That's for the politicians. Or you can go down the French route, which at the moment they're saying, well, actually, what we're going to do is we're now going to put a CO2 emission on, and what happens is it's going to be on the production of the car, logistics of the car. So Chinese are made with brown fuel, and the logistics of bringing it here to there. You won't get the £5,000 subsidy or grant that the consumer will have, and they're bringing that into Italy. So there are those other ways that they're putting it on rather than emissions than necessarily going, it's a 20% tariff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So technology, there's some fantastic technology on board those Chinese EVs, aren't there? Really at a, very reasonable price at entry. So if the UK public really, is, and we've talked about, they're not actually wedded to their brands in this country, are they?
I agree with that,
and they're quite adventurous, UK buying public. So you've got this fantastic tech on board coming into the market. It's going to eat into a finite market share. Who are going to be the casualties?
Wow. It's very difficult to understand exactly who the casualty is going to be. I think what's going to happen is we're all going to go towards EV, and it's a number of those manufacturers that are slow to move into that EV marketplace. I think that's going to be a big problem. It's difficult to say who actually is going to be the people who are going to suffer more than anybody else. But I think, from a dealer's perspective, when you're looking at should I take on an EV, a Chinese EV company or not, I think, as Owen's already said, it's very much about, it's going to go hand in hand with the existing products that's already there. You're not going to have people taking on the EV, so dealers taking on the EV model on its own, because there's no after-sales involved in that. No. So it's going to be a very gradual move on this, and to identify who's the weak link on this is extremely difficult to identify.
Right. Okay, Mike.
So Bloomberg does a survey every 6 months to consumers about intended purchases over the next 12 months. And brand loyalty is actually very, very strong for premium brands, so less so for the volume brands. So without being too specific, you can see where the potential to gain market share for the Chinese is. But as I said earlier, I still think it's going to be very difficult for the Chinese to make an impact beyond what MG is doing at the moment.
Okay. Owen?
Yeah, so we've got a roughly 2.3 million market new vehicles, right? I mean, and even then, we're talking at the moment pre-registration. So there's a lot of cars coming anyway, naturally, from what we call the legacy manufacturers. So now we're going to get the Chinese to come in as well. So there will be, we believe, excess cars in the market, without a doubt. Where they fit themselves is going to be really interesting in each of the segments. Who's going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser? I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not going to say. I'm not going to tell you, because we work with a number of the manufacturers, and like these gentlemen here, we don't want to put ourselves on the line. But what I think you'll start to see is, I think you'll start to see a rationalisation in the brands. I think you'll start to see car companies, OEMs, drawing back, and we've seen that with General Motors selling Vauxhall, for example. I know that's not because of Chinese brands, but they rationalise their portfolio. We're starting to see others that are walking into commercial vehicles more than into passenger car vehicles and moving out the A and B and the C segments and so on and so forth. So I think there's that rationalisation to take place as well. Will there be somebody who is affected by it? Possibly, because at the moment legislation is moving very, very quickly on emissions, and that is making it very difficult for the current legacy manufacturers to compete with the battery manufacturers coming from China, as Tony said.
Yeah, clean sheet propositions almost, aren't they?
That's the big issue, yeah.
That's the big issue. Okay, thank you. So what does a dealership do faced with so much choice coming into the UK market, at the same time negotiating the agency model challenge? Owen.
Right, hit me with about 4 questions at once. So that's, I mean, in the way the manufacturer of the agency model, because they don't have a legacy set of dealerships, they can choose to go down which route they want. Like so Geely will be going down that route of agency, direct sales. But as you can see with Volvo, which is part of the Geely group, as you know, Polestar, they've also got that ability to service through the after sales with the Volvo and the Polestar. So they've got that opportunity to take that in their hands. There will be others like BYD that are currently going through the process of, we'll go down the franchise agreement model. So I think it's going to be a mixture. What I would say is, if the agency model is successful for the likes of Geely, there is always the opportunity, if BYD decided to, and I don't know, move over to the agency model, they could well do that as well. So they have that flexibility where some of the legacy will have to either jump into the agency or stay out. I can't remember the second bit of the question, sorry, my apologies.
The choice, how does a dealership actually work out which one is going to be the actually strongest contender?
Sorry, my
Because I
apologies.
think you told me about your Middle Eastern experience. And
Yeah,
what did they
so we did some work in Bahrain, and I'll say one thing, that the Bahrainian market is much more advanced than here. So they've already got 10% market share, and where have they taken it from? They've taken it from the Chevrolets, they've taken it from the General Motors, they've taken it from the Fords, they've taken it also from Toyota and Kia and Hyundai. And Kia and Hyundai and Nissan are the big players in that market. So they have taken market share, and they've done it at quite a speed. I would say between 5 and 10 years they've done that, depending on brand. MG is the biggest one there at the moment. So the quality is there. What should the dealer be looking at? So when we went in there to determine what the dealer should be looking at, is we interviewed all the manufacturers, so the national sales companies of the manufacturers, and where we could, got the financial information from them as well. You have to ensure that that's a stable brand. If you're going to partner with that brand and you're going to invest all that money with that brand, yeah, or the brand is going to invest that money with you, you need to make sure that's financially stable. So we would be looking at the gearing, we'd be looking at the cash flow, we'd be looking at interest cover, all the sort of stuff that Mike and I'm sure Tony would be looking at to ensure that the dealer is in the most secure position they can have, and they've also got a network that is also secure as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. Tony, you advise Chinese EV manufacturing brands, and you've got insight into the business models that eventually they may want to adopt.
Yep.
So for a dealership in the UK who has signed the contract to represent them, how long are those contracts worth, said that, as in there may be a transition towards a direct sales model?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, actually. I think that everybody's come into this market at this moment in time, so BYD and Aura, and the same with Moda. And I know, for instance, XPeng, they're looking to come in back end of next year. Whilst they would like to go agency model, they're not going to. They will go franchise model. And everybody at this moment in time is going franchise model. The reason they're going franchise model is, one, it's easier. Secondly, it gets the cars off their books very, very quickly. If you're a new manufacturer, you don't want to be holding loads of stock for yourself. You want to try and move that stock quickly onto the dealer network. So therefore, the franchise model is what just about everybody is looking to do. My big question is that just a Trojan horse? Because ultimately, having known them a little bit, because I've worked with them, is that they would like to go much more towards the agency model, ultimately. So yes, stick at the franchise. Interesting, BYD are a very, they're Hathaway, so they are very, very much about the traditional route. So not too sure whether BYD would go that way. And to be fair, Aura is very much with IM Group. But I would say overall, they would like to go agency model, but most of them will not start as agency model. They'll start with franchise model. And I would suspect that ultimately, they will move more towards an agency type of framework.
Okay, you say ultimately. What will they have to be put in place for them to enable that transition?
The way that they are coming to market at the moment is fundamentally to go alongside existing manufacturers. As they grow, yes, that will therefore increase in terms of you start to get more and more soulless businesses that therefore become operational. And in doing that, that's when you can start to have a relationship to... the thing with an agency model, you should not have an agency model with a cliff edge. It should be done as a glide path. And I think that's therefore how I see that probably a lot of the Chinese manufacturers look at is trying to get that glide path towards being not necessarily direct, but more of the agency type model eventually.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mike. What's your feeling about how the business model will develop?
Yeah.
And what time frame? I mean, what sort of time frame are we talking about?
I haven't got too much to add from what the other two have said, but just in terms of direct sales, and just referring back to a survey that we did in September. So in Europe, 20% of consumers said they would be open to direct sales. But in UK, it was actually higher, it was 25%. So maybe UK consumers are more open for that. But I feel you need to have an established brand for buyers to consider buying directly.
Yes.
So that's going to be an issue for
and do you think
people coming in.
Fleet's role in that whole dynamic will be critical, and perhaps for how long, 5 years, 10 years, just to get the visibility of Chinese EV brands on the road? Yeah.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's also building up the after sales.
Yes.
If you're going to put these out into the fleet market, or you're going to put them out into the retail market, or any market, you've got to have the parts, you've got to have the distribution, you've got to have the after sales to cope with that. Otherwise, the cars will just be, they'll lose the brand, they'll lose any brand recognition, I think, in the end, if they're not careful.
Right. Very conscious that I'd like to open the floor up to questions, but I just actually, one of my last points was, we're talking about volume, we're talking about the sort of the lower price point cars, but how does a Chinese EV manufacturer actually, take it up a notch with the premium and the luxury?
That's hard.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of things, that Mike was saying, is that the premium brands, there's a lot more loyalty than there is in the volume manufacturers. And volume EV, with EVs, you get more people who are agnostic about the brand.
Yeah. And
we found that. So I see that is really the heartland of where they will build up their overall brand credentials. Let's be honest about this. The Chinese product is very good. It's a good product. Where I see the biggest issue for them is their go-to-market strategy. Their go-to-market strategy has a lot of flaws. And you've seen that with BYD and Aura. Just look at their sales figures. Year to date, at the end of October, they're 628 and 718. That's all in the whole year. And 92% of those are fleet. Yeah. So it's not to do with the product. It's to do with their go-to-market strategy. But once they get that sorted out, then I think they've got a better proposition.
Okay. So how do you improve that go-to-market strategy, do you think?
We're just getting back to, the actual product. So I was at the Munich Motor Show in early September, and the show was dominated by Chinese brands. And everyone was like, wow, these are really good products. Big screens, good interface. Got to drive some of the cars, really nice to drive. And then when asked what was the price, so I drove the Xpeng G9, which is an SUV, and it was 72,000 euros. And then you start competing against the likes of BMW and Mercedes, and they're going to find it very, very difficult. So it's going to come down to price.
Yes.
Ultimately.
And Owen, same.
It's price, and it's getting that sales process correct. It's controlling the sales process from the distributor, getting the understanding of doing it, and I think that's one advantage they will have in coming to Europe, is they will absorb the knowledge and the understanding in Europe, and then take that with them as well to wherever they go next.
I think my last question is, for the dealerships in the audience, is it worth taking on that when the business model is likely to change down the road?
Okay. We're going through unprecedented times in this industry. We've never had so many different things going on simultaneously. And therefore, if I were back in dealership land, I would say I need to be flexible. I need to be open-minded to look at all the possibilities that are out there. And that does mean looking at things like Chinese manufacturers coming into this marketplace.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that flexibility. So I've covered the sector for 23 years. In the last 4 years, the changes have been so significant in the previous 19 or so. So yeah, flexibility is going to be key. Things will change very quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree with both the commentary here on that. But please, do your due diligence. If you don't do your due diligence, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Chinese brand or it's a Vietnamese brand or whatever the other brands that are coming down the road, and wherever they're coming from, that's your risk. You have to do your due diligence.
Are those figures quite easily
Mike could probably tell you
secured,
more, but
so,
what you should see with the quoted ones, yes, without a doubt. I mean, there's always question marks on quoted companies. Nothing's ever been 100% about everything. But you have to look into the financials, look at the investor relations websites. Don't just go and look at the pretty pictures.
Yeah.
Yes, they're very exciting looking cars and they're fantastic, but there's got to be something behind that.
Yes.
As I said before, how much are they manufacturing? Is it viable that they can manufacture that few cars? I mean, Lordstown, for example, in America is a classic example, didn't manufacture enough pickups, and look what happened to it. So, you've got that problem, but as Tony said, you've got to have the flexibility, you've got to think about it, do your due diligence is what I would say.
Right, okay then. I've talked enough. They need to talk some more. So I'll take some questions from the floor. Hopefully you're all enthused about the prospect of Chinese EVs entering the market. Is there a microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. I feel a bit like Dave Allen sitting here, for anyone that remembers him. Question to Tony. You mentioned that the Chinese have got challenges with producing right-hand drive vehicles, mostly. I have no expertise in manufacturing, but shouldn't it be easier to manufacture a right-hand drive EV than an ICE vehicle?
It probably is. But if you look at the people who are coming to market at the moment, so Chery is a very good example. They are in Australia, they are in South Africa, so they already have those credentials. So on that basis, for them to come into the UK, very simple. You start to talk about some of the other car manufacturers who don't have any right-hand drive heritage. They are struggling to come into the UK. I mean, the engineering in terms of making a right-hand drive car compared to a left-hand drive car is actually quite considerable. Yes, it is. You're dead right. It is easier with an EV, but still you have to enable that to happen and get the economies of scale to do that. That's the key part of it. There's only us, Japan, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and India who are actually right-hand drive vehicles.
Yeah.
So unless you're into some of those markets already, it's very difficult to get that pure economies of scale to actually say, yes, I'm going to invest amount of money in terms of making a right-hand drive vehicle to come to the UK if you're not in any of the other markets.
Okay. Any other questions? Sorry.
I've got an observation also with regard to promoting the sale of luxury, like you mentioned, the Xpeng G9, 72,000 euros. I worked for a long time in California a number of years ago, and Lexus introduced their LS400, and compared to the BMW 7 Series, it was the same sticker price, but the affordability was subvented so heavily with their lease programs that people bought it. So maybe that's what the luxury Chinese manufacturers will take a leaf out of that playbook.
Yeah, I don't think they compete directly at the same price points as the likes of BMW and Audi. It will have to have some other added feature to get customers interested.
Okay. Just one question from me, actually. There have been sort of noises that Chinese EV manufacturers are looking for manufacturing bases in Europe. So what would that do to the whole dynamic pricing, tariffs, acceptability?
Yeah, okay, so my view is, yes, they would like to get a foothold in here. We know that BYD are talking about going into Hungary. So there's lots of talk about it. And it's a lot easier in order to have your manufacturing plant local to where your market is. It's almost a chicken and egg situation, however. Do you put your manufacturing plant in now and hope that the sales come? Or do you get a level of sales before you put your manufacturing plant in here? Do I think that they will come in here? Certainly, a number of them will do. There are a number of factories as well which are going to become vacant. So let's be honest about that.
Are the people who actually, the firms, the businesses, the car-making businesses that actually own those plants that they're going to vacate, a good signal, a good indicator who's going to leave the market anytime soon? No? Or is it just they're right-sizing their operations?
I think they're just right-sizing. But the other thing that I'd add to Tony is you've got the rules of origin coming in 2024. So you've got 2024, 2027, when you're going to have a quite a large proportion, 45, 55%, that is basically manufactured in the EU or the UK. So, do you want to be hit with tariffs after that when you could actually bring a factory in here if it's already, as Tony says, already available and it's already up and running? The answer is, makes common sense to me that you do it.
Yes. When are we likely to see those, do you think?
I mean, it's probably going to be a couple of years away, I would have thought. I can't give you a precise time on that.
I think you have to wait to test the market first.
You test the market
Yeah.
first. You take considerations of the rules of origin for 2024, and then after that, you would then make your plan. So it's going to be planning a couple of years after that because it takes time to plan the production process and get it all in.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a bit of time.
You've just got to remember what a cost advantage China has. So, wages in many regions in the north are 70% cheaper than Western Europe. There's now battery overcapacity in China, so battery prices are falling significantly. So, and plus the subsidies that Chinese government gives, the low electricity costs, it's going to be very difficult
Yes.
to compete with Chinese prices, which is going to question whether they'd set up in Europe.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Here's one here.
Thank you. Just listening to what you're saying, do you think that there's any potential collaboration or platform sharing between these emerging Chinese brands and the legacy brands? I mean, the obvious one's BYD as a battery manufacturer.
Yeah, I think the answer to that one is yes, it's already happening. You look at XPeng, they've just got £700 million which have come to them from VW. Leap Motors have just done a deal with Stellantis. So that is happening. Those smaller ones, those ones who are disruptors, they need money, actually. That's their biggest problem at the moment. And if they can get some sort of cooperation, so, Leap Motors, XPeng are two good examples as to how that's going to happen. And, what VW have done with XPeng is VW going to use the platform that they use, I think it's for the G7, that they're going to use, that VW are going to use. So, absolutely, some of those manufacturers will definitely want to. So the legacy manufacturers in Europe will definitely want to try and partner with some of those pure EV manufacturers, which are more flexible, more agile, and have probably got very good, like XPeng, have got very good technology. They will want to partner with those and have started to do that, as have Leap Motors. So the answer to your question is yes. I can't quite see why BYD would, is my honest answer. I mean, BYD are strong. I don't know what Mike thinks.
No, I agree with that. We talked about some Chinese brands will go out of business because they run out of cash. Those with good tech will get outside investments, as you mentioned with VW and XPeng, Stellantis with Leap Motors. But for the companies that are profitable, such as BYD, why would you? So they just don't need to. So, more consolidation in the business.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting. 67% of all the gigafactories in the world are in China. I mean, that's how big this is. 80% of all EV manufacturers are focused and based in Asia. That's where the heartland has been. And China, last year, sold 5 million EVs? That's 50% of all the EVs that were sold last year. And this year, they'll sell probably 7 million. That'll be more than 50%. So they've got a great advantage in terms of their domestic marketplace is EV-oriented. And when you have your domestic market, basically enabling you to go elsewhere, that's a huge advantage for them.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
both have spoken about, the car manufacturers getting together. Same for the battery manufacturers. You say 80% is manufactured. If you look at graphite, 90% of all graphite in the world is refined and processed in China. And at the moment, we've got a situation where the Chinese are saying, well, should we let that go? So I think you've got to do it. People in America that are some of the big American brands are now partnering up with CATL and people like that. So I think it's not just the manufacturers of the vehicles, it's the manufacturers of the batteries and the technology that goes with that, because they are light years ahead.
Yeah. Okay, any last questions? Yes, please. Just down here. Oh, thank you. Just down here.
Out of interest, so the XPeng and the Leap motor, do they automatically become the multi-franchise of choice in VW and Stellantis? Stellantis probably yes. VW? Don't know.
Right. Okay. So you're sort of saying that they become part of the family.
Indeed.
Okay. What do I think will happen there? At this moment in time, there's no expectation that will happen. I don't think they necessarily will. I don't think either brand. That's in either the brand's interest. I mean, they both did it for quite, not short, yet almost short-term interests. VW needed a quick leap into getting a platform that enabled them to put their batteries on. So therefore, that's why they got into bed with XPeng. XPeng needed money. That's why they wanted 700 million euros. So that's, I think it's more of a short-term, opportunistic move rather than a long-term partnership. I don't know what the guys think about that.
Yeah, so Volkswagen's buying the technology. It's not buying the brand. And maybe they overtake XPeng at some points, but it's not for the branding point of view. With Stellantis, it's more of a long-term partnership. So they've got a 20% stake. They're going to set up a joint venture, and Stellantis is buying into the cost base in China. So this joint venture will be for exports to other markets. So yeah, Stellantis is very much it's a long-term partnership.
Yeah, I agree with it too. Yeah,
Yes,
I think.
but you can see that strategic positioning, can't you?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
all about resources. It's all about technology at the end of the day. Well, thank you, everybody. If there's any more questions, I don't think so. We've talked a lot, hopefully given you a lot to think about. We know they're coming, and it's basically prepare yourself for the implications. No doubt we'll talk next year about what happened in the intervening year. I'm sure there'll be a lot to report. Thank you then.
Yep.